So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Lester Godsey. I'm 2/3 into my 100 days as CISO for Arizona State University. But before you freak out, this is my 3rd iteration of being a CISO. So I have mileage. We'll just leave it at that. So.
Yes, and so we were, the purpose and the goal really of the workshop is just to set a baseline of like what you would focus on in your first 25, 50, 75, and 100 days to set you up for long-term success.
Yeah.
And,
go
okay,
ahead.
and then I had a question that kind of fell flat on the first time, so I'm hoping this group's a little bit more lively. But has any of you had a really bad experience with a new leader being hired and you almost immediately knew it wasn't a good fit for some reason? Yes? And what kind of led you to think that? Anybody want to share?
A lot of the times it comes down to how that person makes you feel in your role. And it either will call into question like whether you're living up to the expectations of that job or if that new person doesn't understand the expectations.
Absolutely. Anybody else want to share?
I guess mine was funny because it's back when I was in a different role. Our leader came from TV production, so they had no background or clue as to what IT was, and they were trying to dictate what the strategy was, and I was like, but you don't know IT, you know how to edit videos and film commercials, but you don't know cybersecurity, you don't know network, you don't know services operations. So that was my experience with that, having somebody at the helm that knew nothing about IT.
Okay.
So for those of you that didn't hear, his experience was the leadership didn't have practical IT experience, training, and couldn't effectively lead as a result of that. So
just to look a little bit further from a distance, I think it depends on what the purpose was of hiring that person. I mean, we're not on the panel to hire that person, so they might be hired for a specific reason that we don't know. They might be doing a great job in that perspective. But in my view, if they are driving away all the experience, making sure people leave the ship, that's when you're in a bad situation.
So I think that's, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I replaced a CISO that was technically right in everything that he wanted to do, but organizationally wrong in how he wanted to do it.
So that's a great segue to a little bit more specific background about this use case, right? So Andy shared what the fictitious Cactus Core company looked like. We're going to add a little bit more detail. So while Cactus Core has been around for over 30 years, they've never had dedicated cybersecurity leadership within the organization. So you all are the first CISO for this organization in particular. And so some of the things that you learned through the interview process, right, was cybersecurity was technically part of the CIO's responsibility because whether they had leadership or not, somebody had to do it, right? But it was fragmented all over the org. So, for example, sysadmins were responsible for security configurations. Networking was responsible for firewall. The desktop group was responsible for endpoint protection, et cetera, et cetera. And so, but things have reached a head along those lines. So as Andy mentioned, part of the motivation, and this came up in your interview, and you were dumb enough to accept the position. So, but this came up in the interview that, hey, Cactus Core is trying to expand into Europe, so GDPR was a big thing. They're manufacturing, so for those of you that have manufacturing experience, assume the worst about legacy technology, right? So that's reached ahead because they want to ingest and adopt more cloud services, which obviously is a higher level of risk. And then as Andy mentioned, they also want to leverage data, AI, things of that sort, to refine their business processes, be more efficient, add more services, be able to basically make more profit, which then from a data security perspective also comes into play. So all those things combined have reached a head where they finally have decided, hey, we need dedicated leadership around cybersecurity. So.
Yep, and so Lester provided some additional context about Cactus Core. Is there anything that you guys would be questioning or want to know to help you determine where you want to focus in your first 100 days? Yes.
What the culture is.
Okay, great.
Even though you have your leadership skills, you kind of have to learn where they are, how they feel, and then go in and try to help
Love that. Yep, absolutely. I think to the point earlier, right, there's not necessarily a security culture, so you'll need to help define that. And I know Andy, when he was talking about Cactus Core, there's one thing that I thought resonated with me, but resistance to change, right? And so that's the culture. Anybody else?
So we're talking manufacturing.
Yes, correct.
Manufacturing, in principle, has a high level of risk awareness and preventing that. At least that's what I've seen working in manufacturing. So is this something similar here? Is there like someone who's from the C-level focusing purely on those kind of things operationally? Is that in place, or?
So if I understood the question, so he was asking about, because it's manufacturing, what's the risk from a leadership perspective?
If they're managing that, like
Yeah.
what you
Oh.
typically see in manufacturing is they've got like a big play, you can have so many days without any incidents.
Right. Okay. So, yes, because they're manufacturing, they do have a culture of risk, but it's focused on the specific manufacturing component. There isn't anything from a cybersecurity perspective. Also, collectively, and I'm just riffing off the last workshop, they don't have a true enterprise risk management program for their organization. So it's very siloed. Manufacturing might have one from a OSHA safety perspective, right? But holistically, there's not an ERM where they're aggregating all the risk elements within the organization. So whether it's cyber, whether it's fiduciary, whether it's reputational risk, or compliance, et cetera, et cetera. So there's not that level of true enterprise aggregation of all risk, if that makes sense. And there's certainly not anything from a cyber.
So when you get to the product, the intellectual property and et cetera, starting to tear that up, and Andy actually brought part of that up too. But we were just talking about the GRC process almost has to fall on top of that before you can figure out, are you going to go left or are you going to go right down the path? Right?
The thing is, I mean, GRC in an organization that's new to cyber is a completely foreign term.
Yeah.
But the most important thing, I mean, getting into manufacturing as the first CISO, which I did at an international organization, you have to find out what their perspective is on cyber and what role it plays in their job, right? So you interview all the execs. What do you view as risk? What are the things that are your non-negotiables? And how do you view the role of cybersecurity with regard to your job? And it's just an interview. It's not even a conversation.
So,
just to get their cultural perspective.
So along those lines, do you want to talk about how we're going to?
Yeah, so we are going to give you guys
startups,
10
so
minutes
thank
to
you.
work
No,
in teams
no,
of
that's a
up
good
to
thing.
5. And put on each sticky note, as you can see there, right, we kind of broke the first 100 days into 25 days each. And what would be your key priorities during each one of those time frames? And 10 minutes, and then we can kind of debrief, and it goes by pretty quickly. So we're just not going to focus on the first 25 days, so eat all 4. Does that make sense?
So one thing I would encourage, there's no set way that you have to go about doing this, right? Some people like to identify, hey, where should I be at my 100 days? So you work that way and work backwards on how do you get there. Some of you may be thinking, okay, I'm going to do this in my first 25 days. This is my second 25 days. However you want to skin that cat, knock yourself out, but don't be limited. So start working in your groups of 5 or whatever.
Or 3, whatever, yeah.
So in this instance, the question is, who does the CISO report to? You found out during your interview that they report to the CIO, which may or may not be the ideal situation, but because this organization has never had a CISO, they were a little iffy about, hey, who should this person report to? So they want to keep technology with technology, which might factor into what your long-term objectives are, right? So.
Okay. You guys
So-
going to work in teams?
All right,
Oh yeah, post-it
you should have
notes,
stickies, break up into
pens,
teams of 5,
hopefully,
and
or
start brainstorming.
markers.
Yes, sir.
Do we know what they manufacture? Are we estimating that?
I don't know if you guys need this or pens.
Yeah, the short answer is,
Okay.
I don't know. Well,
I mean, the other thing I agree is we were talking about earlier, that's going to be critical to determining IP,
So I will say they are generating intellectual property of some nature. So
Oh, shit.
yeah, I don't know what
I don't
the
know if
actual
anybody
nature of that
wants
is.
this or not.
Last time when I ran this or did the workshop, I threw some monkey wrenches in there, like they had DoD
Okay, so
contracts and
I
stuff like
didn't
that.
get
So
everybody's time.
right, but
Okay,
but
so-
there is
so
IP.
10
We'll just leave it at that. So
10 4.
Yeah, we're doing better on time
Okay,
management.
yes, I know.
Oh, my first day was.
So anybody?
No, I'm talking about like just like writing policy reviews. So I mean, I would say.
So the good thing about this is, yeah, we're focused on the 100 days, but from a CISO perspective, that's just the beginning, and it's not like you shouldn't be thinking about post 100 days in the process, right? But part of it is how are you demonstrating you actually know what you're doing, and they should keep on employing you. So.
I say day 100 start working. I don't want to say like learning, but I mean, yeah, I mean it's going to be. Are you, assuming you have money, are you going to be able to actually implement anything? Like, hey, we're going to have to buy this tool. I'm going to spend my first 90 days just documenting this stuff, and then you start actually changing things. Because like, I've never seen something. I think you're right. We're going to start putting
How much time do you want to
So
give?
I think we had 10 minutes, so I think it was 10:40 technically. So
10:40?
8 minutes.
All right.
And then hopefully we can do more time chat.
Yeah.
Because I lost track of time last.
So just as a time check, 6 minutes, and then go ahead and put your stickies up there. We'll start talking through what you guys have provided. So.
Developing a roadmap. I would say probably 50%.
Do what? So based off of the, actually, so let me say this to the larger group. So real quick, want to share with everybody. So the question was brought up, do you have a cyber team? So based off of the org structure and how everything was decentralized, we talked about firewalls were NetOps, right? Desktop did endpoint. You don't have any dedicated full-time security staff currently. So factor that into your conversations and your planning process.
All right.
So keeping the regulations in the drone now.
The only thing I write anymore is my name or my signature.
Strategy, right? Yeah, strategy. I write like a first grader.
All right. So in 2 minutes, start putting your stickies up so we can then start talking. 2 minutes for stickies. Oh, whatever, my ass. Whatever. Yeah, you're so full of crap. Huh? Glittery crap. Glittery crap. So. I like how the sticky matches your hair.
So these are the relationships that you're establishing.
You know, if you're open to it, we're always looking for volunteers for next year's CISO Village. No, seriously, man. So, yeah. I'm trying to get on the panel because it's less work. So I told Andy next year I just want to do a panel. So.
starting your interview now. Trying to decide.
Everybody.
We got a lot of information, but you need to start doing something. So you need to start making some.
Yep. So if you guys want to start putting your stickies up, you guys ready to start putting your stickies up?
Talk people into this stuff.
So how you doing, sir? I'm 2/3 of my way of my new job. So.
You studied there, right?
Huh?
You were a student there, right?
I was, yeah, and I started my IT career there back in the mid '90s. From '94 to 2003 is when I worked there.
Yep, that's
The first
true.
time. So, yeah.
Yes, that's true.
OT and IT are completely different ballgames.
Agreed. Okay. I love that. Okay. So I'm trying to just.
Oh, skip level interviews.
Yeah, I
That's
like
interesting.
that. Okay.
I think this is very well done.
Yeah.
I don't know. I would think this would go
1 minute.
Sure.
Oh, before day one. Gotcha. I would think this would be more here, probably. Actually started to use more. We're looking at there.
All right. All right. We appreciate everybody putting their stickies up on the board. We would love to debrief and see like where there might be alignment or maybe some discussion points. I do love that one team in particular put like even prior to day 30 doing some discovery work. And so that was your team, correct? Oh, sorry. I was saying that one team added prior to day 30 doing doing some discovery work.
Day one.
Sorry, prior to day one, correct, sorry. Okay, and what kind of discovery would you do prior to that?
So for those of you that didn't hear, one of the, no, privately owned. So this team came up with prior to day one.
Prior to day one, yes.
What would you do as a CISO, right? Good.
To understand what the company's mission, vision, all those kind of things. Any public information about your organization that can give you some insights and kind of
So if you didn't hear, do some basic due diligence with regards to the company. To your question, are they public, privately owned? What's the leadership look like? You know, information along those lines. On a practical term, I would encourage you to do that if you're interviewing for the company in the first place, right? Let's just be honest. So I just started at ASU. I actually talked to one of the prior CISOs. I talked to current employees. I talked to other people vendors that actually did business with ASU. So I knew what the hell I was getting into, honestly. So, and I don't care if this is recorded. So.
Expectations too is key, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know, when I used to interview, I would always ask that question, like, all right, so I'm going to come work for you. What are your expectations of me within these time frames? Because that kind of gives you an idea whether they're thought about what they're doing. So you know, like,
Yep.
all right, I might have to educate these people on really what the reality of things are, or they're grasp on it.
One of the themes in the first 25 days in particular, you're just doing discovery, right? Let's just be honest. You ask some questions. Hopefully you've done some discovery even before you accepted the job. But that's thematically one of the big things, right? So whether it's about culture, whether it's about inventory assets, resources, org structure.
Well, the language of the organization, right? What their non-negotiables are in terms of risk that they're willing to accept.
Right.
and how they actually describe risk. Right? Healthcare, it's patient safety, and in manufacturing, major manufacturing, it's going to be, human life, or worker safety, or it's going to be uptime, whatever it is, because all of your risk descriptions from that point forward have to be centered on the language of the business from a risk perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And not only like is it important to understand understanding your vendors, and somebody put up there the budget. I didn't have any knowledge transfer with my predecessor. I was getting emails like on day 5, hey, this tool's coming up for renewal, and I'm like, I don't even know we use this tool. When does it due? What is happening, right? And so it's really important to understand, and again, most of you already put that by either meeting with key executives, meeting with leaders, meeting with stakeholders, understanding the environment, looking if they have any policies or standards, or do you have to build it from the ground up, right? So I think that's probably fairly obvious, and you guys all put that on there. And then if we move on to day 26, a lot of the topics up there is around risk assessment, gap assessment, understanding the controls, understanding the weaknesses.
Yeah, some of you mentioned in day 26 through 50, you already started talking about developing strategy, or at least the framework around the strategy, right? So one thing I want to mention that I don't want to be or say anything incorrect, but did anybody mention anything about a communication plan? So one thing that all of us as IT security nerds have a tendency to do is focus on the technical stuff, right? What security controls do we have in place? What's our inventory look like? What's the staffing? What's the skill set? What's the vendor ecosystem look like? And I'm not saying those are bad things, but going back to the culture conversation, how do you affect cultural change? First and foremost is communication, right? How do you build confidence in your leadership? And so a lot of us have a tendency to forget about communication and formalize what that communication looks like. And that communication is not a one and done. It depends on who you're communicating with, right? So if you're talking to your CIO or the CEO, your communication is going to be at one level. But if you're seriously talking about building a culture of cybersecurity, what about staff in different organizations? What about the administrative function, right? Your HR, your finance. We might be focused on the manufacturing part because that's critical to the success of the business. But what's that plan look like?
If you are reporting, as a CISO, if you're reporting into the CIO and not the CEO, you want to make sure you understand how that CIO is talking to the CEO. Because if there's a disconnect, you want to make sure it's dealt with.
So what he said was, if you're reporting to the CIO, what's the CIO doing on your behalf to help communicate that? So one of the things that I'm doing at ASU is sneak peek. I'm working towards my 100 days of having a program strategy and a 3-year roadmap. But my other priority is building security governance. And so to your point, I report to the CIO at ASU. And so, but I'm not assuming, and I'm not leaning on my CIO to effectively communicate across the organization, right? And so we have a tendency to forget about that. So governance as a primary vehicle for a communication is critical.
Some CIOs don't know anything about cybersecurity, so they depend on the CIO. But some CIOs report into the CFOs that are bean counters. I'm not being and that creates more of a problem within the organization as well on the budget side.
It's not just budget though, it's also decisions being made. You've got to manage, because if the CIO is interpreting that decision or interpreting it before it comes to you, that can be a problem. So understanding all decisions that are being made is very important to managing the security of the organization.
But when you talk about key stakeholders, right? Yeah. You've got regular meetings that you need to establish with your matrix team, but getting on committees, right? And even if you're just a fly on the wall committee, but also with groups like procurement, with product management. All those groups, you can see the pipeline of what's coming down towards you, so you can get ahead of it, right? Even accounts payable, HR, legal, right? All of those groups, and just your presence is actually going to drive conversation, but it also gives you that visibility, so you can start speaking into that. Because in the first 100 days, that's a fire hose. They're asking you what it tastes like, right?
So just to summarize along those lines, so when you're developing your communication plan, I don't know if everybody could hear all that, but ultimately part of what we collectively do as security leaders is we have to understand what language the business ultimately speaks. And this is the reason why we tend to be focused on risk. Not all risk is created equal, but like we established, there's no ERM for Cactus Core. But based off of who the decision makers are, you have to speak in terms they understand. More often than not, it's some flavor of risk, right? So do we want to jump to day 51?
Yeah, I think we only have 5 minutes left. So I did not have an opportunity to look at day 51, but I would imagine at this particular point, you're working to develop a roadmap and your strategy and your program so that in day 75 to 100, you can communicate what your plans are, how you're going to address the top risks, maybe what budget you might need, what additional team members you might need, or maybe we're inheriting those team members and we're forming our own team. So one other thing that I'm not sure if I saw up there, but might be useful is like just trying to see like what documentation might exist beyond just the policies and standards, assuming they even have any. Most companies, right? Like if they don't have a cybersecurity program, aren't going to have the foundational components. But do they have vulnerability scans already? Have they ever done a risk assessment? Are there any sort of pen test or not? Like that might be useful as well, just to kind of understand. And one key component that I think is sometimes often overlooked, especially in manufacturing, is securing IT and securing OT is like completely different. And so I know that there was a comment earlier in the first 25 days of understanding your technology, but that's also an important point to call out. And I think just overall too, and it seems like we've gotten there, right? It's like at some point during the 100 days, you might want to execute on some quick wins and kind of demonstrate value, but you don't want to do like significant drastic changes probably during your first 100 days, right? Especially for a culture that is resistant to change.
So one thing I want to add along those lines, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit, right? I'm assuming everybody is working under an assumption that at the end of your 100 days, you're going to have a strategy and you're going to have a roadmap that you're communicating to your organization, right? Because if nothing else, you need something tangible to demonstrate that you have a plan, you have a vision, and that it ultimately aligns with the organizational goals and objectives, right? But one thing that we may or may not be thinking about is that strategy and roadmap, that's a living sort of document, right? So you're ultimately, even though we're focused on the first 100 days, you should already be thinking about what's the framework that you're going to be operating in, moving indefinitely in the future, that's going to allow you to continue to be successful, change what the priorities are for the organization, and how cybersecurity is going to evolve and adapt to meet those changing needs, right? So along those lines.
Framework is about consistent reporting over time.
Absolutely.
Regardless of who's doing the measurement.
Right.
And so they're going to give you kind of that list of what you should be looking at, but it's really about how are you reporting success repeatedly over time.
So I think we need to jump to 76, day 76.
Yeah, I thought we.
Oh, we do?
Oh, I don't know, maybe not.
So in addition to the strategy and roadmap, is there anything else tangible that you should be delivering or planning on delivering between day 76 and ultimately 100? What else should you be focused on? Huh? Employee development. And so how are you going to demonstrate that you have a plan for employee development?
There's a real easy way to basically take out your needed skills, right? And then you measure your current available staff to the skills that are needed on their ability to either they know it, they're familiar with it, they can execute it unsupervised, and they can teach it, just 4 little brief things, and you can look at what do I have, what don't I have, and where do I need to execute on that. And that's easy to do in a matrixed organization like you're going to have here, and that's also going to help you in your employee development or your resource planning.
So just because I'm living through this right now, so in my draft program strategy and roadmap, one of the things that I've identified, I'm not going to have it done within my 100 days, but I've identified in my plan that we're going to develop a service catalog of what our services are currently. And then in my plan, I'm also articulating what my desired services for the organization are going to be. So I'm not going to be quite there from an employee development, but I'll have identified where our gaps are along those lines, right? And so some of the tangibles, eventually you might want to develop a service catalog that articulates the nature of your services, and then that way your organization can say, that looks great, but what about this? Well, I got you covered. It's in our program strategy and roadmap. That's going to be in year 1, or that's going to be in this quarter, or whatever the case is. What else should you be developing between day 76 and 100 to your organization?
I would say that you need to show some progress, so at least a few quick wins. You need to demonstrate your value.
So what are some examples of quick wins?
Like implementing MFA.
Oh, yeah, you keep on going back to that one, huh?
Implementing
so
MFA.
Policy creation. So identify where your pain points are. Policies oftentimes are the foundation by which you can then actually execute, right? Like MFA.
What's your gap assessment that you're bringing back and getting agreement on with your key stakeholders? Because that's going to get you your money. And particularly a really great alignment with internal audit and legal, because they have direct line to the board. That's where your cash is going to come from.
Okay. So
We went back to the beginning. We went back through the culture and something changed. Right? Did you actually make the change
Thank
that
you.
you expected? So constant improvement. You never
Being able to look at gaps and get agreed on gaps. And then you're seeing the changes in terms of behaviors.
Okay, so go ahead.
Talking about using an AI to manage our big data. I think during day 75 we could probably show some sort of documentation or something along the lines like, hey, this is the AI model we're planning to use, as well as having that be set up for EU regulations, because we know EU they have long privacy, so we probably have some sort of setup or a basic kind of setup of how will the AI filter out privacy information.
So based off of what Tiara said, so the starting point might be development of a policy around AI, right? As it relates from a regulatory perspective. So we're almost out of time. So any last parting thoughts?
Yeah, so there's a lot of knowledge here. Did you actually have like it written down somewhere for everybody to share on that? Or I mean, there are some 100-day playbooks out there. Just putting it out there because it can help you to.
Yeah, so there's templates, I mean, hell, I guess if you want to use ChatGPT to build your 100-day plan, you can do that, right?
Yeah.
So, but this is the reason why this group is so important. So, a lot of us have been through the ringer. We are open to sharing that information, build your network, and then you pick and choose what works for you. So, Dina, any last thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, and I shared this in the first time, and again, it's not a story that I love to share, but I started my career in cybersecurity at American Express, and after 5 years, I was given an opportunity to move over to IT, and I was very young, very ambitious, and I just jumped in 2 feet, and I just started trying to make a bunch of changes, did not talk to anybody, and had a new leader, and I will admit, I only lasted 6 months. So just don't make the same mistake. I mean, I know it's obvious to all of us because you guys are all experienced. Like, you want to contribute, but you want to make sure you're adapting to the company.
So thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you.
Our bell line, going to the first one.